Good morning and welcome to the Agiloft webinar series. I am your host today, Danielle Haugland, Global Alliance Director, former big law litigator turned legal tech and contracting enthusiast by way of a super long and windy road. And I've traveled much of that road with our guest today, Rebecca Thorkildsen, or as she's affectionately known, just Thor. Rebecca, you got your hammer out?
Oh, good.
Okay. Rebecca is a driving force in EY's global legal solutions practice focusing on CLM. And full disclosure, I've learned almost everything I know about CLM from Rebecca. She is a true treasure in this industry. Today, we're talking about how CLM brings value to the entire organization. Contracts have long been the domain of legal teams, but their effects are really felt throughout the organization. At the same time, many organizations struggle with siloed and inefficient contracting processes that weigh down commerce. Here at Agiloft, we think of contracts as the DNA of a company, digital assets that inform and drive just about everything the company does. So as companies start to think about their contracting journey, they should be thinking holistically versus taking a siloed approach. So before we jump in, let's get some housekeeping out of the way. We're aiming for a 40 to 45-minute discussion followed by questions, which our audience can pose in the Q&A. We will do our best to get to everyone's questions within the time that we have and follow up on any we can't squeeze in. So, Rebecca, let's dig in. I know EY has done some really great work around what CEOs are thinking in regards to contracting, and I'd love for you to walk us through that research, share your insights, and lay the groundwork for our discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. If anything, 2021 was the year of the survey and the studies. We all had a lot of time on our hands to really start thinking what's on everyone's minds. And so one of the big studies that EY conducted was something we called, the CEO imperative. And it really was a lot of research about what are the CEO's priorities, what's driving business. And, there's a lot of the usual suspects in there. You want to enable the business and maximize growth. I know we'll talk quite a bit about that. Certainly you want to reduce costs, mitigate risks, digitize the business, a whole variety of things. But simultaneous to the CEO imperative study, EY, we also really wanted to dig into contracting because we ourselves had really seen quite an uptick in the areas of focus on contracts across the organization. And we partnered with the Harvard Law School Center for the Legal Profession. We were able to survey 2,000 professionals that touch contracts. So we're talking legal, procurement, commercial, contracting functions out of global delivery centers and so on. And I guess not surprisingly, we had this as a hypothesis. 92% of the respondents said they have some type of project underway to change the way that contracts are handled. And when we really dug into that, we could see that a lot of the reasons for taking a fresh look at contracting links back to some of the things we were learning from the CEO imperative. So, certainly there's a big focus on how much it costs to actually get a contract done. That's research that's come out of World Commerce and Contracting. Those numbers have been around for a while and they're astronomical. No surprise, the legal function is hyper-focused on risk mitigation. And so a lot of the respondents said that's what they're trying to do. Digitizing the business, 70%. They're looking for transparency. Everybody wants to know where their contracts are. And of course, enabling business growth. So there's a lot of ties back to really the overall CEO imperatives, the growth of the business, where everybody's trying to head. And really what we're seeing is, despite the pandemic, despite, what we're seeing now, even with supply chain challenges, the businesses that are thriving are the ones that are investing. They are looking to change. They're looking to transform. They're not just protecting what they have.
So that's a really interesting insight because it goes to contracts enabling really the competitiveness of the company. So let's focus on that fourth pillar for a minute, enabling business and maximizing growth, because this is a great example of contracts and the contracting process having enterprise-wide impact. And if we flip to the next slide, I was really struck, or maybe it was on the previous slide, but we can stay here for just a second. I was really struck by these two stats taken together. Number one, 50% of business development professionals said inefficiencies in contracting processes resulted in lost business opportunities. Mind blown. And then on this slide right here, you drill down further, and a whopping 94% of biz dev professionals say they face challenges working with their contracting teams. So biz dev goes straight to the bottom line. Like, what is up with that?
And it really is astounding, because the fact is contracts have been around forever, and organizations have them all over on a global scale. Everybody's touched a contract at some point, it seems. And a lot of different parts of the organization have focused on finding a place to put the contract. They have focused on templates. Let's improve our templates. Let's put templates out there so maybe some others can use them and we can try to get the contract done more quickly. But regardless, everybody we've talked to, this is 2,000 professionals, 94% said that they have some type of contracting issues. And when we started to distill down to what those top issues are, slow contract turnaround times. None of us can deny contracts are getting, tougher to do. There's great regulatory concerns. There's a lot of pricing pressures. But the fact is, the process is just really bureaucratic. And as we really dug in, we could really see that there were challenges with knowing who owns the contract at what stage. Mm-hmm. When do handoffs take place? When should they take place? A lot of baton handoffs between those who request the contract, those who might be tasked with running the process, those who are tasked with providing approvals and taking on escalations. So there's, just a lack of that clear guidance, and really a lack of documentation about the process. And so it's not surprising as EY that we just have a lot of people calling us and saying, we need to do contracting better. We think that we're losing a lot of value in our contracts, whether it's sell side being able to take advantage of price increases, whether it's buy side getting the value out of your suppliers and what they're supposed to deliver. But the bottom line is, if you can't get the contract done, you're not doing business, you're not growing. And if you don't know what's in your contracts or where they are, you're not ensuring that growth continues and that you're getting all the value you need. And that goes directly to the company's bottom line.
Absolutely. So what are the findings around what companies are doing to address this?
Yeah, so if we could go to the next slide, there really is a lot of focus right now on transformation. It seems to be the buzzword as we start to round out the end of 2021. We are seeing large scale transformation at a functional level, legal, procurement, sales functions, but all of those seem to have within their purview contracting transformation. And I would really divide this into really two categories. So we are seeing a lot of, very tactical focus. So organizations are coming to us and saying, we want to look at our system and see if we can improve adoption. They are saying, we don't like our system at all, and we'd like to tear it out and replace it with something else. Or we've seen a lot on artificial intelligence. Can you tell us how that would improve? So a lot of technology-driven sort of tactical discussions. But then again, we also do see organizations that are taking this transformational mindset. And one of the interesting things I recently saw was we actually received an RFP from an organization that basically said, this is going to be our third attempt at trying to transform contracts. And originally, this was anchored in the procurement function. And we saw some good changes around procurement and sourcing, but it really left out a lot of the stakeholders that touched the contract. And so the legal stepped in and said, we're going to now anchor transformation in legal. And what happened was the organization came back and said, we ended up with a process that was pretty risk averse, pretty bureaucratic. So we recognize we really need to do this together. So this idea of transformation, but transformation in a collaborative fashion, has really been the order of the day. Re-engineering the contract process end to end is what a lot of organizations are looking at.
Yep. And I think, when companies start thinking, when organizations start thinking about transformation, in my experience, a lot of times they start with technology. And of course, technology plays a key role. But we can never forget the magic formula of people, process, technology, because you need all three with a dash of data to be successful, right?
Yep. That is exactly right. And this is, one of my favorite ways to really look at CLM transformation. And, really I don't want to say there's nothing wrong with starting with tech. I mean, Agiloft is one of the leading technologies out there, and we've had tremendous success with it. But leading with technology is, in many ways, it's a surefire way not to get the value out of the technology. And really, what we tend to recommend is to look at the overall operating model of how CLM operates in your enterprise. And the building block, the foundation of that is really the process. So you can, everybody's seen a contract lifecycle process in some shape or form. It tends to start at, when a contract is needed, how do you launch that? Who takes it on? All of the tasks that need to happen to make sure you have the terms and conditions, the legal terms, the commercial terms, getting those into the contract in a way that's agreeable to the organization, getting that signed off. And then there's the post-execution stage as well. So what do we do with the contract? How do we get the data out of that contract, and who uses it for what purpose? But I would also say that just as important are all of the adjacent business processes. So if you're a procurement team looking to transform, you're generally thinking about the categories of spend that you manage. You're thinking about your strategic sourcing activities. You're probably thinking about third-party risk management. And at the end of the day, you want to know if that contract is functioning, are your suppliers delivering. There's a whole variety of tasks that come after that contract is signed. So thinking about that in a big way is your foundational building blocks. Who's doing what and when? Because once you buy a system, you want to look for the chances to automate. You're going to look for the chances to, use the workflow to pass that tool. Maybe there's some self-service that you can do. And that's where we start to get into that resource model and how do we actually source? Because you're going to need to pass that baton. You want to reduce the friction points for those baton handoffs. When the requester says, I need a contract, and your contracts team tries to actually generate one or take a look at one that's come in on other party paper, which is more tricky. And you need to think about, are we going to be doing this ourselves? Are we going to be outsourcing it? So all of these are decisions that ideally you should be making in advance of actually sitting down to design a tool like Agiloft, because there's so many powerful features to technology enable all of these stakeholders. But if you don't know what you do, what generally tends to happen is you just start to automate the old process and you miss all those opportunities to really improve, to really take some of the steps out, to identify the duplication of effort, to look for the chance to automate or self-serve. So a lot of that work can really be done, before the system, sits down, before you sit down and start to design. That's where you can start to identify the data that's needed at each step, what the stakeholders are looking for that transparency in the contract, and so on. And if you do it as a cross-functional team, meaning you have representatives from your different functions, from your different business units, the people who are touching the contract, that's really where the magic starts to come into place.
Could not agree more. And this is a great transition into the next graphic, which I love. on how CLM, or really the contract platform, the CLM workflow interacts with other business processes and tools throughout their organization. And I do love this graphic because it shows how contracts are connected to the organization more broadly, from quote to cash, source to pay, and legal functions. And I mentioned in the opening that we think of contracts as company DNA that feeds data to these connected functions. It's a great goal. And but in your experience, Rebecca, are many companies actually here? And if not, how do they get there?
Yeah, and this is really, I think, the unfortunate reality, and in some ways, it's the crux of what has been challenging. So, when we started, I said, it's astounding that so many organizations say contracting isn't working well for us, given the fact that most organizations can look back and say, yeah, we did a contracting project. But a lot of those projects historically had been done in silos. So, for example, you might see the legal team recognizing we don't have access to a contract once it's signed. And historically speaking, that wasn't a big deal because the business owned the contract. But as more contracts come back for, commercial disputes, or in an M&A situation, or a regulatory-driven repapering, the legal function suddenly says, I'd really like to have easy access to those contracts. So, we've seen legal functions, for example, focus on a repository, and they look at the tools they have and they say, yeah, we could store this in our matter management system or a document management system. But the rest of the organization doesn't have access to it. And then you have your procurement team who's focused on strategic sourcing, and they probably put in a source to pay system, and Ariba has great contract capabilities. Ticks the functional boxes, for example, but it doesn't really meet the needs of the sell side. Definitely doesn't meet the needs of the legal function. And then you've got the same thing with the sell side, who's looking at their, CRM systems, their Salesforce systems there too. Might check some functional boxes of, CLM capabilities. But what you have now is you have all these different silos in an organization. They're not talking to each other. Each function is doing their own little piece of the CLM lifecycle, and nothing's talking. And so this is really where Agiloft shines, is that Agiloft sits right at the cornerstone of being able to manage sell side, buy side. It has the workflow and the AI support for the functions that legal teams use. A GBS, or a centralized contracting team, can actually manage an end-to-end process regardless of which direction the contract is heading from stakeholder to stakeholder. And that's really where we're starting to see this transformation. It's the idea that it doesn't matter if a contract is buy side, sell side. There's a lot of things that are similar. There's legal T's and C's that would work for both. There are processes that would work for all. It's not easy to identify, but if we can centralize a lot of that into one system, it makes it much easier to then extract the data, the information, the insights that you need from that contract, that transparency, so that the contract can then continue on its journey through its respective source to pay value chain, lead to cash value chain. So this transformation is really centered around the enterprise contracting system.
Yes, it is. And thank you for the plug. Appreciate that. So let's kind of take it to a higher level. Let's go to like 50,000 feet. And in real terms, how does a robust contracting process help the company? Who benefits and how?
Yeah.
And we can flip to the next
slide. So this really is, it is about transparency. And I think anybody who's worked in the contracts world as of lately knows that transparency is the driver. So, we talked about the fact that, if you can't get the contract done, you're not bringing money into the business. So we know we need to get that contract done. But having visibility into what did we actually agree to? If we're selling, did we agree to our standard sales terms, or did we agree to something that if we don't deliver, it's going to get us in trouble? How about our opportunities to take advantage of price increases? So knowing what you've put into a contract, taking that data out and actually putting it into feeding that information into business processes that help you make sure that you're taking advantage of your price increases, that you're delivering what you've said you're going to deliver. Doing that in a way that you can do your business reporting and see, which sales have worked for you, which are actually driving revenue. That's how you actually get to the bottom line. And certainly, if you are improving contract cycle times, again, I'm going back to the cost of just getting a contract done. Mm-hmm. Every time a contract comes back for another red line, for a review, every time it's iterated and escalated, that costs money. That's professionals' time. That's time that those professionals can't be doing something else of value for the business. So that too is a hit to the bottom line. So that transparency of process. So revenue, transparency of what's in the contract and how that's generating money. Transparency of processes. How long are things taking? Who's touching the contract? How many times are we seeing a contract come back after a red line? Are our terms and conditions working for us, or are we constantly negotiating them because the business or our business partners won't accept them? That's another type of transparency that's going to impact the bottom line if you use the information that's there. It's ultimately going to result in productivity gains. You're going to do things faster. You're going to do things more consistently. And ultimately, that's going to reduce your risk. So you know what you're promising, you know what you're delivering, you know what you're buying, you know what your vendors are delivering, and you're doing that with terms and conditions that everybody's agreed to, and you know when it's necessary to move beyond your preferred terms and conditions. So a good CLM system is going to give you all of these transparent insights. You will ultimately become a more, your business will grow, your risks will reduce, all of the things that go back up to that CEO imperative.
Yep. All the things.
All the things.
So now let's go back into the weeds, and I think we can skip over the next slide 9, because I think Rebecca touched on that. And we can move to slide 10. Yep. So we were at a high level. What does the contracting, or how does a robust contracting process help company-wide? And you focused on transparency really across all levels. So what does this look like in practice? How does a company, or what does a company need to do to actually get the ROI out of transforming the contract process, get all the things that you just talked about? How do they get there?
Yeah. So I'm going to share really two different frameworks that are, in our opinion, a core to true contracting transformation, and the way that you actually get this to work and not repeat some of the same mistakes that other companies have made that have caused them to come back and say, let's do it again, let's try again. So the first is really taking a look at the process and the players. So these are the building blocks of that operating model. So again, process and resources, who's doing what and when, what are the activities? And it's not just looking at the contract life cycle. So the yellow text that starts with contract intake and triage through the contract digitization and admin, that's the contract life cycle. I would encourage organizations to think about all of the different value chains and activities that happen both before and afterwards as well, that are somewhat reliant on the contract to be done in a good way, or that may have information and insights that inform what should happen during the contract process. You can lay these things out in a chart and start to look at all of the different stakeholders that are involved and all of the different things that they do, where information may be generated, where it might be useful to help, for example, determine the risk of a contract, or who should be looking at a contract, or what terms and conditions should be in there. But by taking the time to go through this exercise, and really looking at the value of your activities and thinking about who should be doing them, you're starting to lay the framework for building a workflow system. You're laying the framework for designing better templates and playbooks that you can automate in your systems. And you're also looking for the information that needs to flow from party to party and system to system so you can get that transparency and data that you need at each stage to make sure the contract and the system itself is giving you value. So that's part one, the process and the people. The next slide is the other real lesson learned is really taking an agile approach to the design and build and test of your system. So I know agile is a term that's thrown around a lot, but anybody who's been through a system design and implementation knows that the traditional way that this had been done was that, you know, everybody would sit in a room and you'd go through design workshops, and those don't go away. But you start, you know, almost with, I don't want to say a whiteboard, because vendors will hand you the design workbooks and say, tell us what fields you want and tell us what should be in your drop-down menus and who needs to be on the workflow, who sees the contract first and who sees it next. You still need to go through that. But what we would really argue for is that tools like Agiloft have such an easy to configure interface. A lot already comes out of the box. Really what you need to build into your cycle is the option to do short design sprints and prototyping. Put some small tidbits in the hands of your users, the people who actually have to work with the system. Let them know how this is going to feel. So you don't develop an entire screen and an entire workflow only to have somebody say, I am never going to data key 96 fields into the header of a contract record. It's just not going to happen. So, you know, it's an opportunity for people to say, yeah, I could live with this. I can see the value in the clicks. And honestly, you know, I say value in the clicks. I'm actually, again, borrowing a client's phrase, not mine, but I literally just had an AGC tell me the other day, our team just does not see value in the clicks. And they, you know, are just beside themselves with, you know, how do we change hearts and minds? So the important point is don't let the hearts and minds get away from you in your scramble to get a system out there. Let people test it, build some time into your timeline. Make sure that your legal team is happy and not working with a clunky system, that they have an interface they're comfortable with. Make sure that your procurement team can see the information they need to make good sourcing decisions. Make sure your finance team is getting the information they need to compute working capital. You know, there's all these different stakeholders that have all these different needs. Bring them in. That's how you're going to see true transformation.
Value in the clicks. I am so stealing that. That is awesome. All right. So let's bring this home. An easy way of looking at this without getting overwhelmed is to begin at the end. What are the basic desired outcomes? What are you trying to achieve? And when you break it down, it really is simple. It's super simple. Companies want to make money, save money, keep the boss happy, and stay out of trouble. So let's walk through each of these and then we'll turn to questions. And Rebecca, you and I can kind of go back and forth on these, but why don't you start?
Yeah, and we, you know, really come back to this idea of make money, grow the business. That means getting your contracts done more quickly. That means being able to do more deals. That means figuring out how we can do those two things. And that's where the transparency comes in. Get the data out of your contracts, get your process data in order. That's where you can start seeing the rubber meet the road.
Yep. And anecdotally, I've actually heard that, you know, the faster contracting process leads to a competitive advantage. So if you're able to turn your contracts around faster, you're able to contract with vendors or customers that much, you know, more quickly. And that can be a truly a key critical or a critical competitive advantage for companies.
And I was just going to say, Danielle, I mean, there's been a lot of focus on the idea of relational contracting and the recognition that, you know, the contracting process is so fraught with friction during the negotiation process. It almost has gotten to the point where both sides are asking, why do we even decide to do business if we can't trust one another? So There's also a lot of, thought about how do we just remove the friction and get to the point that we can just get these contracts done and not ruin our relationships in the process.
That is spot on. I have seen deals fall apart because, done deals fall apart because couldn't get the contracting together in a former life. So that's a great point. All right. So moving on to save money. This is pretty basic. So Rebecca, why don't you start with this one?
Yeah, save money. So, this has been the holy grail and, really the strategic underpinnings of so many projects for so long. Mm-hmm. And, again, I'm going to go back to, you give a nod to World Commerce and Contracting, who's done so much great research. First, how much does it cost just to get a contract done? So, if you can shorten the cycle time, take out some of the players, let your players, your high cost employees and professionals who are spending a lot of time on contracts actually do more for the business to add value. All of that saves money. But then coming back to the contract itself and the transparency of the contract, if you know where you have an opportunity to save money, so volume discounts, that's a big focus of strategic sourcing. Understanding if you have the right for a rebate or something because somebody didn't deliver. All of those are terms that are stored in your contracts. And if it's just stays in the text of the contract itself, you can't take advantage of that and you can't save that money.
Yeah, you negotiate those for a reason, right? So that you can actually take advantage of them. So moving on to keep the boss happy, and I'll tell you what I think of this. It really goes along the lines of what you were talking about with transparency, always having the answer. And the boss could go all the way up to shareholders, CEO, the C-suite. But it's really at every step or every level in the organization, you need information to feed up. And a lot of that information comes from the company's contracts. So, this is where being able to extract information and data, that DNA that we've been talking about throughout today, can really help in making the business function and keeping everybody's boss happy.
It is so true. And frankly, there are still a lot of companies that can't answer these basic questions. How many contracts do we do? Well, I might be able to tell you how many of, 2 or 3 types, but, there are other contracts that are stored in another system. Or, well, we don't know if everybody's putting their contracts in here. Well, we don't know how much they're worth. So, those are the basics, but, we're also seeing increasingly sophisticated questions. Things like, do we have the right terms and conditions in our agreements? Are these working for us, or have we taken an approach that's just, frankly, not in alignment with the market? Are we too risk averse? Have we covered off on our risk? What about our commercial terms and conditions? Are these actually delivering and impacting the bottom line, either positively or negatively? So even moving beyond the contract itself, really getting down to, the business, the legal, the risk questions. These are insights that, increasingly sophisticated CLM systems are able to help answer, as long as you know what the questions are you want to answer. I mean, some of that is the key, is knowing what you want to be able to answer.
Yeah, and that goes back to begin at the end. Know what you want to answer, know what you want to track, and that's going to feed, what information comes out of the system. Yep. So the last one is stay out of trouble. And I think this is pretty self-explanatory, but, CLM systems really allow law departments and compliance departments look at their risk, contract risk across a portfolio, your limitation of liability, your indemnification, making sure that those are in line, that there are no outliers, that there are no rogue contracts, out there with the crazy limitation of liability clause. So Rebecca, talk us through how companies can use CLM to stay out of trouble.
So this is where CLM gets real in my world, because controlling risk in some ways is the root cause of the complexity of the contracting process. So I don't want to in any way downplay the importance of, making sure that you are covered off on your regulations and that you're not breaking the law. But, and the challenge is that, regulations are always growing, they're always changing, the law is always changing. And, that is the purview of the legal function. And that is why, legal has such an important role in the CLM process. And yet you always hear the refrain, legal is a bottleneck, legal is too risk averse. And, really the right answer is somewhere in the middle. And it's really the most effective CLM processes have found a way to strike an effective balance. So there's a couple of points here. The first is that if you actually look at where many organizations have gotten in trouble with their contracts, the WCC has done a ton of research on this. But usually the clauses that most organizations get in trouble with from a commercial dispute perspective are the commercial terms. It is rarely about one company is suing another. And in fact, we have a client who says, listen, he said, I'm really not that concerned with the legal T's and C's. What I'm really concerned about is making sure that we have a path in our contract for solving ambiguities. He says, we don't try to solve everything in our contract. Rather, we're willing to take a little bit more risk with our legal T's and C's, as long as we know that if we come to a point where commercially, we might not agree on what's to be purchased or delivered or how we're going to, rate service quality. We have a mechanism, whether it's arbitration, whether it's, we put in place meetings, there's a whole range of things. But the idea here is finding the right balance between business facilitation and mitigated risk. Where the contract system really comes into play is giving the ability that once, both the business and the legal and the commercial and all the parties that need to have a say have agreed to what appropriate risk taking is, get that documented into a playbook, and then you use your technology to really serve as your control mechanism. So you don't necessarily have to have legal review every contract. If your process and your terms are documented, you know what an acceptable fallback position is. At some point, if you can enable your shared services team, your managed services team, or even your contract requesters to do a bit more of that handling, whether it's pushing that work to a lower cost resource or just enabling the right person who has the most insight into the importance of that contract to do more and reduce the number of handoffs, that system is going to flag when you're getting out of a line, when you're starting to get out of that comfort zone, and when you do need to draw legal back in. So this is really, if you build this right, this is where the system can really help you to achieve all of those operational and cost efficiencies.
So I'm gonna add a slight tweak to this and throw you a bit of a curveball. So when you were talking earlier about keeping up with regulations, I was thinking about all of the recent regulatory changes that impact whole swaths of countries, regions, like the LIBOR changes, GDPR changes. How can contract system or contract processes help companies address basically mass amendments?
Yeah, this too is where an enterprise CLM system really starts to shine above and beyond maybe some of the traditional CLM capabilities for just capturing data that come in some of the more functionally focused systems. So, first and foremost, in order to address those large scale changes that often happens quick, You need to very quickly have access to the contracts that are impacted. So having a centralized enterprise record that's your golden source of contracts, already takes step one out of the equation, because everything's in one place. You don't have to go out and collect from your myriad of different systems. The second is, how do we find the contracts that are impacted? So it used to be the only way that you could do this is either with a full text search, but you have to know what words you're looking for, or you could data key a lot of data in and do a search based on, search and filter. But the emerging artificial intelligence, and in particular Agiloft, has something that now enables you to do something as needed. So you don't have to try to guess all of the different things you're going to need to search for. We don't have to data key what our indemnification is or a certain type of data privacy clause, but rather you can start to use the natural language processing capabilities. That means that your artificial intelligence search engines can actually go out and find clauses that are conceptually similar. So, an easy one is, if I want to find confidentiality clauses, it should be able to bring back something that doesn't even have the word confidentiality in it. In the traditional full text search, you had to search for confidentiality, non-disclosure, and every variation of the word. So in these regulatory change scenarios, your contracts are centralized. You have a tool that you can use to help find the contracts that are impacted. And then the third piece is really the ability to build workflow and contract assembly or generation. So if you need to start putting together notifications, amendments, whatever it might be, to say we need to update our contract to meet the new regulation, you have those tools at hand. So the bits and pieces are there. Doesn't mean it's all fully assembled. You're still going to need a team to think through what the steps are. But the enterprise systems are bringing together all of those capabilities that really, truly help you to do contract management beyond just getting the contract done.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for answering my curveball. So let's open it up to audience questions. And thank you so much, Rebecca. This has been a lot of fun. I love working with you.
So I see one.
Okay, if you see it, go for it.
Oh, what's the best way to convince legal stakeholders or leadership that the contracting process needs to change? And how do we start this conversation? And again, this really comes back to understanding, the water cooler chat. Not that we all have virtual water coolers these days, but there usually are places where you can see that the organization is struggling. The contracts that have been in process and are going unsigned, going on 6 months, 7 months. What about that one that took a year to do? So, what is the root cause of that? Those types of things, everybody's always first to point to legal, and quite often it could be legal, yes. Very often there's a lot more to the story than that. So the idea here is, if you want to convince somebody that you need to change, you need to first identify, what the challenges are. And then you also need to demonstrate that there is the possibility to fix those errors. And so in particular, if you've gone through a process to put in a contract system, it is going to be harder to convince stakeholders that there is a way to change. So, sitting in, looking through case studies, calling upon people like Danielle or I, we can definitely help to bring forth case studies where there were extreme challenges. How did organizations get around it? Where did they start? That would be my suggestion. Danielle, I don't know if you have others to add.
No, I think you covered just about everything. There's another question in here that's a really good one too. What if procurement wants to work in a totally different contracting system and are not willing to change their process or system?
Yeah. So, there's sort of good news, bad news to this, because this comes back, I think, in a strange way related to what we just answered. So this is where the collaboration really has to happen. This is a moment to sit down and talk about, what is the value that procurement is getting out of their system? Because in many ways, putting in an enterprise contract system does not mean you're getting rid of your source to pay system. Very often what it is it's recognizing we have more than procurement contracts, or we have more users than procurement users. And the needs are very different and probably not well addressed by the source to pay system. They could be, but it really comes down to, again, starting with the end in mind. What is it that we are trying to achieve? And I'll give you a great example. This was actually a project that EY and Agiloft worked on together, but we had an organization, multinational company, tons of contract system throughout the organization. Certainly procurement was storing contracts in their system. They had a Salesforce system where they were storing contracts. Legal had their own place. And then all the different business units all over the world, some had built their own SharePoint systems, some still use file servers. This is still quite common. But what happened was there was really a goal from the top of the organization that there was a need to improve working capital. And as they started to filter through all of the different things that needed to happen to improve working capital, contracts suddenly came into light. And the fact that there was little understanding of how many contracts the organization did, what was in the contracts, what were the value of those contracts. And some business units were better than others. But it really came down to, it wasn't just buy side, it was buy side and sell side, amongst other important contracts that they needed to centralize in order to get the data and information that they needed to do the financial modeling, the financial work, as well as improve the processes that would ultimately feed into their working capital aspirations. So that was ultimately a C-suite level decision that we need an enterprise contract system. And so really what happened was it was the business drivers that made the case for change. But more importantly, as all of the different parts of the organization came together, it was also a recognition that that doesn't mean we're throwing out our respective systems that meet our respective needs. Rather, we're going to build the data integration layers, and we're going to take the data out of contracts. And so if we need data to go into our supplier management and vendor management operations, we can do it. If we need data to go to the ERP system so we can do our financial calculations, we're going to do it. But it all started from the top, the vision, and that was ultimately what convinced all of these different fiefdoms with their own contract systems that it makes more sense, and actually what you're going to get out of it is going to be better than what you started with.
So again, beginning at the end, right?
Beginning at the end.
Yep. So for a small but rapidly growing organization, do you think going for the AI feature at the outset of your implementation is worth the initial cost? Sounds like it could be very helpful with the natural language processing to be able to identify documents in your repository without needing to key in a number of metadata fields.
Yep. So, again, we'll keep beating the, start with the end in mind. The interesting thing about AI is it is not a silver bullet. And so it's really easy to think that, we're going to get right out of the box the ability to search for what we need. So the important thing is to consider how you're actually going to use the system. So certainly we have seen some organizations that basically say, listen, we are just going to centralize our contracts. And as long as we have an AI search engine for if and when we need to search for certain clauses, that is good enough. But there was a recognition that, we at least need to have in place a small group of people who understand contracts and have the capability and wherewithal to train that tool if and when we need it. Now, a lot of the AI comes out of the box to be able to find all your indemnity clauses or all your data privacy clauses, but very often there's nuance when you actually need to get to the search. So, always consider that with AI, there is going to be an initial outlay of training the system, testing the system, and you are going to get a lot back, but there are two different measures of two primary measures, accuracy of how the AI is operating. So it's called precision and recall. You're not always going to get 100%. So you still need to plan for what happens for those who fall through the cracks. So getting back to the question, can we just start with an AI tool? The answer is yes, but also think about what else you're trying to achieve. So are there workflow issues? Are there structured data reporting issues where you need structured data out of the system? I would encourage you to just kind of take a step back and take inventory of what you need, and then you can start sort of matching to the different capabilities to see if an AI tool would really meet those needs.
Rebecca, thank you so much. This has been an absolute pleasure. You are a master at your craft, and we appreciate you. And to our audience, thank you so much for hanging in with us for almost an hour. We appreciate you as well. I don't see any more questions, so I think we're just going to go ahead and close it out. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.
All right. Bye.